Hi everyone, Josh from barnfinds.com here. In my previous episode, I introduced you guys to my Fiat 124 Spider. As some of you might recall, she has a pretty serious differential leak. I assume it's a pinion seal, but in this episode we're going to go ahead and take a closer look. And if it is the pinion, we'll go ahead and replace it and get her back on the road. Went ahead and got it up safely secured with jack stands. As you can see, we have a pretty serious leak coming out of the front of the differential where the drive shaft meets the diff. We can go ahead and say it's probably a safe bet to assume that most of that oil is coming from our pinion seal. So we'll go ahead and discuss what we're going to have to do to get that pinion replaced. Alright guys, so now that we're pretty sure it's the pinion that's leaking, we can go ahead and get the things we need to fix it. Now the most important thing you're going to need to get is replacement pinion seal. Now I picked this one up online for just a couple of bucks. You probably can get your local parts store to order you one in, and I don't imagine there'll be a huge difference in price. Now when you order it though, make sure that you're getting the right size. Different generations of the 124 have different rear differentials, and they have slightly different pinion seals. So go ahead and make sure you're getting the right one. Save yourself some time. Now to get to that pinion, or that pinion seal, we're going to need something to hold the flange in place so we can remove the pinion nut. Now there's a tool for the job, but I'm a cheapskate, and rather than buy the tool, I just went out and got myself a cheap piece of angle iron and notched it out. That way I can access the pinion nut. Saves myself some money, and wasn't all that much work to do. Now when we go to remove that pinion nut, we're going to need something to measure how much torque's on it. So I'd recommend that you get yourself a good torque wrench. You'll want the type that allows you to read both directions, how much weight's on it when you remove it. And then the next item, it's not a necessity, but I'd highly recommend it if you don't already have one, and that's to get yourself a good shop manual. Now I'm using the old Fiat shop manual, but I'm pretty sure Haynes and Bentley both make manuals for the Spider, but this will be the one I'll be using and will be referencing to in the video. Now there's two ways to fix a leaky pinion seal in these Fiats, the hard way and the easy way. Now the hard way involves replacing all the seals in the differential, but I'm going to try to do it the easy way and see how it goes. Now to do that, we need something to lock the threads on the pinion nut so that oil can't seep out. Now to do that, we're going to need something for the threads. Now I'm using a thread locker, but you probably could also use silicone. But this is what I'm going to use, so we'll see how it works out. But now that we have everything that we need to fix it, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So I went ahead and removed all but two of the bolts connecting the drive shaft to the differential flange. So we'll go ahead and pop these out. But before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and put some marks on the flange so that I can kind of keep track of how this was lined up before. That way I can put it back to the way it was. So I'll go ahead and just put some lines here to kind of mark up with the fin on the bottom of the differential. That way I can line it all back up really easily. And we want to be careful not to smear these marks because we'll need them going back together. So I can go ahead and pop those two bolts out. And now this drive shaft is ready to come out. Now we could completely remove the drive shaft from the car, but we don't need to. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and slide it back and then pivot it out of the way. And this clears out nicely, and then we'll just slide a jack stand in underneath it, and then we can just leave it in there. Now obviously when we go to pull the flange off, we'll need to move it a little bit more, but that's not a big issue. So now we need to go ahead and clean this out a little bit so that we can put some corresponding marks on the inside. That way we can line our pinion nut back up with the flange when we put it back together, because this has a crush washer in it. So we need it to be fairly close to what it was before. So I'll go ahead and grab my marker again. Maybe. There it is. And I'll just put a mark on the bottom of this and then line it up with the inside of the flange. And of course I'll have to probably touch this mark up again down the road, but that gives us a mark to line up when we put it back together. Now, we're ready now to take this pinion nut off. Now to do that, we need that tool that I showed you earlier that I made. You could have bought one too. And we want to make sure that our holes are going to line up. And it looks like they'll line up nicely. So we can go ahead and grab two of those extra bolts slide this together. Now if you want to put the nuts on the back of these bolts, you can, and then that acts as another way of keeping track of how this flange needs to be lined up. Now we got that on there though, we can go ahead and measure how much torque there is on that pinion nut. So I'll go ahead and put my torque wrench. Now this calls for like a 15th, 16th socket. That's what I have here. So we'll go ahead and put some tension on this, let the chassis be what hold that bar in place for us. And it looks like I gave it about 9 pounds, which is quite low, but that gives us our baseline for putting that back together. Obviously we'll probably go a little higher than that because that's quite low. So I'll go ahead and take this nut off. Now as a secondary precaution to make sure that we get this on there right, I'm going to go ahead and count how many rotations it takes to get it off. That way when I put it back together, if my line has been smeared, I can actually just count how many rotations to put it back on. But I'll go ahead and take this pinion nut off and pull the flange, and then we'll have access to that pinion seal. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'll get back with you. Alright guys, so went ahead and pulled that seal out using a seal puller. Went ahead and bent the seal a little bit, but that's okay because we're just going to throw this one away. But we want to check those numbers on this one before we install the new one to make sure our new one's going to match up size-wise. If you look, 36, 68 on our new one. Whether you can read it very well, it's a little bit different style, but it's a 38, 68, so it should line up just right. I went ahead and cleaned out the area surrounding where the seal's going to seat, and then the face, so that we have a nice clean surface for it to match up with. I also went ahead and drained some of the fluid out of the differential before I pulled the seal out, just because I had quite a bit backed up on it and didn't want to splash it out too much. But all we're going to do is we're going to just, after we've got that all cleaned out, just going to line this new seal in. We want to make sure it seats correctly and doesn't go in too far. But I'll go ahead and get that lined up a little bit better, and we'll get it put back together. Alright, well we're almost done. So we've got the pinion seal in, it's nice and flush. So we can go ahead and reinsert the flange. Now earlier I put that mark on the outside of my flange. So I'm going to find that mark right there. I'm going to go ahead and line it up with my mark that I put down here. And everything goes back together nicely. Now we can go ahead and put our thread locker on there. And you can be quite liberal with this because we want it to fill in those threads so that oil doesn't keep seeping through. Let's see, I'm going to have to come from the top here. Okay. And we can go ahead and put our pinion nut back on. And we're going to count how many rotations we had. So, I threaded the pinion nut on 11 times. I lined up my marks that I made earlier when I took it apart. I checked the shop manual, and it calls for between 13 and 17 pounds of torque on this pinion nut. Now, if you recall earlier, that's quite a bit different from where we started out. So I decided to go ahead and torque it up to the 13 pounds, which puts a good load on the crush washer, but not too much. And it also gets us back into factory specification, which is exactly what we want. Now, as you remember, I used thread locker. Now, I used the blue thread locker. You probably could use the red. I just didn't feel it was necessary to use the high strength thread locker. Now, I know a lot of guys are actually using RTV silicone, which probably would work well. I just decided I didn't want silicone all over the pinion, and so that's why I went with the thread locker. Now, we'll find out down the road which one's more durable. If the thread locker, if it springs a leak, then we'll go ahead and take it apart and try the RTV silicone. But we'll see how that goes down the road. There's a few things that I'd also like to recommend while we're under here. As you remember, I stated that I had to drain a little of the extra differential fluid off before I remove the pinion. Now I went ahead and just drained the whole differential at that point, which you could do that way, or you can drain it when you get it back down on the ground. Now I'll have to drain it some more when I get it back down before I put new fluid in. But while I still have it in the air, I just wanted to point out that the access bolt to put new fluid in is on the top of the differential. They tend to get corroded and rusted on, so it'd be a lot easier to take it off while we have the car up in the air. So I'd recommend doing that and save yourself a lot of time and headache. Makes your life a lot easier. But we'll do that after we get this differential hooked back up. Now, we've got this all ready to go, so we can go ahead and pull our stand out of the way, slide our drive shaft back a little bit, slide it back in, get it all lined up. Now, you remember at the beginning of the video, I went ahead and marked the two flanges. So we'll want to make sure that these are lined up where we marked them, and it looks like we are. So this is ready to go back together. So I'll put the 4 bolts back in it and torque it back down to specification. Once that's done, we can go ahead and get the car back down on the ground and ready for new fluid. So we got that pinion seal replaced, that pinion nut locked down with thread locker, and the differential hooked back up. Once that was done, we were able to go ahead and lower the car back down on the ground and drain out the remainder of the differential oil. So we're now ready to go ahead and put new oil in. Now to do that, we need some type of pump. Now I could get one of the small cheap hand pumps, but I decided to go ahead and splurge, spend a little extra and get this bigger pump. Not only will it allow me to pump more oil into the differential, it'll let me be more accurate. And it also has the added benefit of being designed to pump oil out of an engine through the dipstick. So it's got this smaller adapter hose, which happens to be the perfect size for our differential. So I'll use that to go ahead and pump in the remainder of the oil and get this car rolling down the road. Now there's a few other things will need to be done before she's really roadworthy, such as changing the timing belt and doing a full fluid change. But she's almost there. If you'd like to learn more about this Fiat and the story how I came across it, feel free to stop by at barnfinds.com. Also, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave those in the comments section. I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. I hope that I was able to help someone get their Fiat back on the road. They're great little cars, and I'm excited to have this one up and running and ready to hit the road. Thanks, guys.